Good morning, welcome online with us this morning, wherever you're listening from, and also to those of you on 4CRM who are joining us this morning on the radio. So glad to have you with us this morning. We'd like to thank you and welcome to you 4CRM radio this morning. Before we get started, how about we Google or have a look and listen to this song, Goodness of God by Bethel Music. Goodness of God. Now, today we're looking at part 3 in a series we've been doing called Control Freak, and today we're looking at the book of Esther. So if you have your Bibles with you today, perhaps you'd like to open them up to Esther, and we have a very famous passage that comes from today, and perhaps you've heard of it, and the words have said, for such a time as this. For such a time as this. Have you ever asked the question or thought about asking the question, whether it be in the past or the future or right now, God, where is your help now that I need it the most? God, where is your help when I need it the most? Have you in your life, in your past, if not now, most likely in the future, or where you've asked the question now or the past or into the future, where you say, God, where is your help for me right now? Now, if you've been listening along or following along in our Control Freak series, you'll remember that we've been going through, the first week we looked at Habakkuk from roughly around the 620 BC area. And God informs Habakkuk that he will be raising an unjust nation to deal with an even more unjust nation. And Habakkuk asked the question of God, which I'm sure you have also asked, is why God, why do you allow bad things to happen to good people? Week 2, we looked at Daniel, which is around 605 BC, 15 years later, where Daniel's marched off into Babylon at a young age, and he's indoctrinated into the Babylonian way. And when the world was out of control and there was chaos and bad behavior reigning, we learned that is not an excuse for our bad behaviors. That even though Daniel was marched off into captivity amongst all these things, it was not his fault. He did not behave badly. Today we're looking at Esther. Esther's around the 475 BC. And in Esther, we're looking at the question I asked you just before. God, where is your help when I need it the most? Before we get into this to Esther, let's have another song, and let's listen to the song Gratitude. Gratitude by Brandon Lake. I hope you enjoy this song as much as I do. Now, as we go into the story of Esther, in actual fact, the book of Esther is actually around two people, not just one, Esther. It's about a bloke by the name of Mordecai, and for want of a better word, his adopted daughter, Esther. Now, Mordecai is known as a godly, a Jewish man who's raised this beautiful young lady, his daughter, Esther. Now, there's different sources around this, but one source is the Talmud, and the Talmud suggests to us that Esther is the daughter of Mordecai's deceased brother. Just one idea that it could be. Now, king at the time was King Xerxes, and King Xerxes decides to have a banquet, quite a long party, and we're winding down towards the end of it, and King Xerxes had way too much to drink, and he thinks it's a good idea to summons his wife, who was outstandingly beautiful, to show all his friends and mates, to show her off. Queen Vashti's too smart for this. She knows exactly what King Xerxes is doing, and she refuses, much to King Xerxes being upset. And so she refuses. And King Xerxes gets rid of her on advice from his helpers. He calls them all together, his advisors, what do I do? And they decide that for Queen Vashti's punishment, she is going to be banished. King Xerxes starts to have second thoughts, his advisors get into his ears, and they decide, for want of a better word, they are going to have a beauty pageant. And at this beauty pageant, they're going to find King Xerxes a new queen. And they do that. And Mordecai insists or advises that Esther should enter. And lo and behold, Esther enters and she wins. And Esther wins this beauty pageant to be the next queen. Now, there's a zealous servant of the king. His name is Haman. And Haman orchestrates it so that Mordecai and all the Jews in the King Xerxes' kingdom are to be wiped out, killed, murdered. And this is a big area of the kingdom. This is in the east, from India to Europe, then in the west from Egypt, and the south down as far as Azerbaijan. It's a huge area. And we pick up this account in chapter 4 of Esther. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes. He put on a sackcloth and ashes and went out to the city wailing loudly and bitterly. And he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning amongst the Jews, with fasting, a weeping and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. The Jews are mourning because they're about to be wiped out. We need to understand there's principles and powers of another realm that are trying to prevent the line of Jesus coming for the Messiah. And the Jews are mourning. And when Jews mourned, it was common to be done in sackcloth with ashes, and to mourn in voice, loudly. Very simplistically put, if I can, the sackcloth and the ashes were used as an outward sign of someone's inward condition. Other times in the Bible where we hear about Jews mourning in sackcloth include Jonah, David, King Hezekiah, Eliakim, King Ahab, the elders of Jerusalem, Daniel, and the two witnesses in Revelations 11:3. Mordecai, through his mourning, is hoping to gain Esther's attention because Esther and Mordecai have not actually seen each other for 5 years since she won the beauty pageant. And while she's been living this plush life as the queen, she's not aware of the plight of her people. She has no clue of what's going on. She's not aware of this Haman and his edict to take care and to get rid of all of the Jews. And through some communications via our servants, Esther eventually learns of the plight of her people. And we read this in verse 8. It says, he, Mordecai, also gave the servant, a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, to which had been published in the Susa, to show Esther and explain to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence, to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Mordecai, quite simply, is hoping that the young lady he raised in the ways of the Lord, maybe, just maybe, she could be the one who could save the people. Could she have just enough influence over the king to save them? But we read on and we see there's a problem. You see, we need to understand it's not that simple for Esther. Verse 9, Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. And then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to the king. Just going to interrupt there to another song. Would you join me this morning with Chris Tomlin and Holy Forever? I hope you enjoyed that song from Chris Tolman, Holy Forever. Just before the break, we were reading in the scriptures, and we finished with this, where the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was last called to the king. So Esther is explaining that she needs to be called. She just can't front up to the king without being called, or she may die. Esther is trying to explain to Mordecai, mate, it's not as simple as you think. I have to be summoned by the king. And if I'm not, he could kill, and probably will kill me. Mordecai, let's not forget what happened to Queen Vashti because she refused the king. She also explains to Mordecai that she's not been called for over a month. She's not sure why, but it's possible that she's fallen out of the favour with the king for somebody else. Esther understands that for Mordecai, he's really not giving anything up initially. But for Esther to take the action that Mordecai wants her to take, she could die. And it's very easy, is it not, to ask someone else to die for your cause. It reminds me of a pig and a chicken. And the pig and the chicken, well, they're walking by a church. And there's this huge gala event on at the time. And they're getting caught up in the spirit of raising funds. And the pig suggests to the chicken that they should make a contribution. Well, the chicken thinks that that's a great idea. And the chicken suggests to the pig, let's offer them ham and eggs. And the pig says, hang on, mate. Not so fast. For you, that's a contribution. But for me, that's a total commitment. We face this every day, don't we? To stay comfortable. It's so safe to stay safe and to rationalize that when we stay in this protected world that we don't rock the boat. We can avoid ridicule. And here we find Esther having to wrestle with this. You see, because at this stage we're up to in the verse, Esther has not made the king aware that she has Jewish heritage. Again, Mordecai had suggested to Esther that she doesn't let him know that she's from Jewish culture. So for King Xerxes, Esther is just another beautiful Persian woman. For all of us, we have to face a time where we have to decide, like Esther did, what are we prepared to pay for our Christian walk? What are we prepared to pay for our Christian walk? And we talked about this earlier in the year, didn't we? And you may recall that I talked about whether we're a disciple or a fan. We can go to the football and we can all combine together as the Cowboys score a try in the corner, and together we're all united and we're all great fans. But Jesus doesn't call us to be fans. He calls us to be disciples. And discipling asks a lot more of you than it does to be a fan. And we've talked about how we are called to be a light in the world, not darkness. We're called to be a light in the world of darkness. As a follower of Jesus, we are to become a light pointing to the world of God's greatness. Can I read to you a passage? John 1:5. John 1:5 says this. It says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Micah 7:8 says this, do not gloat over me, my enemy. Though I have fallen, I will rise. Though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light. I've challenged for you this morning. Are you going to let the darkness of the world snuff out your light? Or are you going to burn brightly for Jesus, no matter the cost? Are you going to burn brightly for Jesus, no matter the cost? Mordecai hears this response from Esther, and it's time for some fatherly advice, as only a father can. And Mordecai responds this way. He says, verse 13, he sent back this answer. Do you think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape? For if you remain silent this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Let me read that again. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Let's have another song while we think about that. And the song I want to sing with you is Great Are You, Lord. Because it really is a song to the Lord of how great he is, that he is on the throne of thrones, he is on the King of kingdoms where he deserves to be. Let's sing together. Just before the song, we had that passage, the very famous passage from Esther. But that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Do you know, could I ask you a question? Could I make you a statement, I suspect? Maybe you're right where you are. Maybe you're not feeling it. Maybe you don't understand it. But is it possible God has you in exactly the position he wants you to be, to give someone a taste of Jesus' love? A chance to preach to your neighbor, your friend, to someone about Jesus. Now, here that the Mordecai is giving his adopted daughter a very simple warning. And remembering, we discussed this before, we need to remember that forces outside of this realm are trying to stop the line of Jesus. Because if the line of Jesus is stopped, there is no birth of Jesus, there is no Messiah. So this is bigger at play than just Esther. It's bigger than just for a time as this. And he gives this warning. Do not think because you are the king's house, you alone of all the joys will escape. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will come from another place. But you and your family's father will perish. I'm sure you've seen this happen before, as have I, where people are called by God for such a time as this, and they say no. And be aware that indecision, inaction is a no. And they become miserable because God uses someone else to get his will done, and they miss their chance. And as believers, we are all God's servants, and each one has been planted of God's choosing to be used by him as he forwards his redemptive plan. In an amazing way, each one of us should be challenged by the words, who knows whether or not you have been placed in this position for a time such as this. We may not be called to act as a regent to a great and mighty king like Xerxes. We might not be like Esther, but each one of us can be used by God to minister, to tell them about Jesus, to preach the gospel to a lost neighbour, to a prodigal son, to a straying daughter, a sick relative, a local catastrophe, a hurting heart. How would you respond today if God's calling you? What if he's calling you for a time such as this just to clean the toilets? I want to ask you a question this morning. Where is God calling you? And are you ignoring that calling and hoping that this nagging feeling will just go away? But I tell you, the nagging feeling doesn't go away. God just finds someone else to do his sovereign will. And there's no better place to be than in line with God's will in your life. Because it's his life to do with as he pleases anyway. So why not go willingly to do what God is asking you to do what God is calling you to do? And in your church that you may be on your way to right now, I bet you, as you sit this morning in the congregation and you look around, you will see people who have accepted God's calling. They have been an Esther. The question of, what will you do, Esther? They have answered for a time such as this. And this can be uncomfortable to think of this, that maybe you've in the past have turned down a calling from God, but it's never too late. Listen to God's calling in your life and to be an Esther. What will you do, Esther? What will you do, Esther? And I want you to listen to Esther's response. Verse 15. Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. When this is done, I, Esther, will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. You know, right at the beginning of today, we asked the question, where does God's help come from when I need it the most? Where does God's help come from when I need it the most? In my time of trial, when I most need him, where is God? And where's his help? Well, I tell you where his help is. His help comes from Esther's, who act on God's will for a time just as this. Maybe God is calling you to be an Esther, to be God to someone. You know, that kind word to a stranger costs you nothing, but it means everything to the stranger. Will you love another person's child like it was yours? You feel God's calling me to love that child, and you do it. And when you do that kind act for your wife or your husband, especially when they don't deserve it. When you speak Jesus into someone's life. When you go out at night to Bible study, even though it'd be a lot more simplistic to stay home. What about this one? What will you do, Esther? Maybe it's just as simple as becoming regular in your church attendance so you can be Esther to the newcomers in your church. That when that lady comes into your church and says, my husband's left me, I've got 4 kids, 4 babies to deal with, can your Jesus help me? But if you're not there, how can you be Jesus? How can you be Esther when you're not there? Because something better came on offer. The fish were out. Golf was better. Tennis was there. You've got to be there to be Jesus. You have to be there to be an Esther. What about conquering your fear and asking that friend to church, to serve the church, to put someone else's needs in front of yours? If you require God's help right now, be God's help to somebody else. If you're requiring God's help right now, be God's help to someone in a worse position than yours, and you will be the light of the world. In fact, Isaiah 58:10 says this, and if you give yourself to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted in soul, then your light will go forth in the darkness, and your night will be like noonday. If you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness and your night will become like the noonday. If you're asking the question, where is Jesus now when I need him the most? You be the Esther, because there's an Esther out there that God has sent to help you. Do you know, Jesus was the ultimate Esther. But several times in the garden he asked if there's any way this cup be taken from me. But Jesus, accepting God's sovereign will, which was to come and to save man, saves you and I. It's the bridge for you and I to an eternity with our Heavenly Father. If you're struggling right now, if you're wondering where God's help is, how about you go help somebody else and be an Esther to them? I'll leave you with this challenge today. Esther, what will you do? Let's go to our last song this morning, which is Build My Life by Pat Barrett. Hope you enjoyed that. If you want to make contact with Mackay Church of Christ, we're on all our socials. Love to hear from you, and we will talk to you again soon.